Library here at the State Library of Queensland. I'd firstly like to welcome you all by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we gather on tonight, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and pay respects to the ancestors who came before them. I'd like to officially welcome you to our first lecture in the UQ Architecture Lecture Series. The Asia Pacific Design Library is very proud to continue this relationship that's been running for the last few years. We'd like to thank you also for your patience in the readjustment of the program, and I'm sure you'll all agree with the announcement of the final lineup tonight that the wait has been worth it. Before we start, I just need to remind you to switch your mobile phone to silent or off. Please, if you need to exit during the talk, use the back exit so you don't distract the speakers, and bathrooms are also located on level 2 and level 3 outside. We're recording tonight's lecture, and a lot of the content from tonight will be available on Design Online. If you don't want your voice included in the recording, can you let us know after the talk? And we also encourage conversation during our lectures, so it's more about getting involved, and we use social media to do that. So if you want to ask a question or continue the conversation online, use our Twitter hashtags, which you can see up there. There'll also be question time at the end of the lecture, hopefully, or opportunities for questions that John will facilitate. And tonight we're very happy to announce that we're launching the Design Offline Journal, which is a very special journal that helps support your note-taking in more of a guided and creative way. So those are on sale outside and also in the library bookshop for future lectures. I'd now like to introduce you to John Macarthur, who will facilitate tonight's discussion.
Hi, I'm John Macarthur. I'm the head of the School of Architecture at UQ. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders of the Brisbane Valley and Moreton Bay peoples. Tonight's the first of our annual lecture series on contemporary architecture, and the School of Architecture at UQ and our partners, the State Library of Queensland Asia Pacific Design Library. So there'll be a series of lectures on Tuesday evenings over the next few weeks, and I'll announce that after tonight's session. So tonight's a presentation that I've been looking forward to of Anupama Kundoo and her collaborators' exhibition at the Venice Biennale of Architecture last year. Now I know quite a lot about this project at the level of arguing for funding and signing travel permissions, but I'm yet to see what actually happened, so I'm very much looking forward to tonight's lecture. So the Venice Biennale of Architecture is the premier exhibition of the state of architecture in the world at any one time. It attracts tremendous visitor numbers, press and critical commentary. Not long after Anupama joined us at UQ, she was invited by the British architect David Chipperfield, who was the curator of the 2012 exhibition, to exhibit in the main pavilion of the Biennale. Anupama formed a team with Michael Dickson from our school to design the exhibit, and they were joined by Greg Killen, an engineer who provided advice, and then by students and technicians from UQ, masons from India, and students from Italy during the construction. It was an extraordinarily ambitious approach that Anupama and Michael proposed, as you'll see in a minute. I originally advised them to do something more modest, as the project was too risky, and as you'll see, I was nearly proved right. But it was a success, a great success, and it exemplifies several of the things that we're trying to do at UQ. Involves thinking and experimenting with architecture at full scale. It was a collaboration of architects and engineers and students from the School of Civil Engineering. It was international in the cross-cultural experiences that it provided, as well as in the global publicity. And it provided unique opportunities for students to contribute to a research project, to travel and to make new networks. So tonight we're going to hear from Anupama, from Greg, Michael, and two of the students who are involved, Katie Horgood and Chai Chen. I'll briefly introduce them. Dr. Anupama Kundoo has an architectural firm under her own name and aims to work across theory and practice. She holds a degree in architecture from the University of Bombay and a PhD from Berlin Technical University. She's a senior lecturer in our school and has recently received a special mention in the ArchVision Women and Architecture Prize. Michael Dickson's an architect who's worked in Malaysia, Latvia and Australia. He's won prizes and mentions in the Cleveland International Design Competition, the Hobart Waterfront Competition, and has work recently constructed for Sculpture by the Sea at Bondi. Michael's a graduate of our school and he now is a lecturer in the school. Greg Killen of Killen Consulting Engineers has taught in the School of Civil Engineering and the School of Architecture. He was a senior associate in Arup's Brisbane office until 2009, where he was a design manager for projects including the Kurilpa Bridge. Let's welcome them all. And I'll invite Anupama to the podium to give the first part of the presentation.
Thank you, John. So the opportunity to produce an actual architecture in an architectural exhibition was mission impossible in a way. And I would like to start by thanking all the people who actually made it possible. It was like a kind of a trapeze act, you know, where you know that if you just jump that somebody is there, exactly there to do their part, you know. And in that image, I would like to thank John for having, you know, enabled that this whole project became a university thing instead of me exhibiting or making a proposal on my own. And I think the fact that I had got this enthusiastic response made me take it further. And maybe it contributed to it becoming more ambitious. But I do want to thank a lot of people really very deeply, because it was like a collective trapeze act between many, many departments. Because like they say that the strength of the chain lies in the weakest link, each of those links have performed, and that's why the whole thing, you know, performed. I've tried to describe in an engineering way, because there was a lot of engineering that we were banking on to have the whole thing, you know, stand there. And so, I mean, I want to thank Michael and Greg. I have never thanked them as of now. Thanks so much, because, you know, it was like, we were like the tripod, I would say. Again, engineering sort of example, that we were the three people who equally worked together. It doesn't mean that we didn't have arguments or difficulties, but everybody held on to their position and enriched. We really had to face all the problems you can imagine, because we didn't know each other at all, and we just plunged into it. But we were all determined to resolve it, and everybody had that goodwill to stick and belief to stick to their position. And that's why this is, for me, this is not about one idea submitting to another, but it's about everybody together enabling something that is different from the one you would have done on your own. So I would like to, I mean, it was also, in fact, Greg who actually started the dialogue with the School of Engineering, who supported us. I would like to thank Cindy, who actually helped us by involving students and financing those expenses. There was a lot of in-kind help already in the design thinking part, where we still hadn't secured the whole money for the project. So we are really grateful for this collaboration that happened from the grassroots level rather than from top down. And then, you know, Graham Schaefer, the head of faculty, he went along with it. And finally, there was a moment where we had come to a point where we had to say yes or no to David Chipperfield. I mean, you'll see at which point that was. But that's when, like a Hollywood movie, there was like in the last 5 minutes, I was phoning John he was in some other engagement, but I needed to know yes or no, whether we would come up with the funding. And Debbie Terry, who was then VC, she came up and helped. And we got the answer. I got a message, yes. And I'm like writing back to Chipperfield, yes. And he was in Rome at a press conference. He has to still know whether we are in or out. So it was all full of all of these stresses. And each of these people have really helped us. There are a lot of people who helped enable the Indian team to go there. I'm not going to thank all the people, because the whole presentation, there'll be no time left. But we'll thank them in India and the Italians in their country. But basically, I want to really thank Avio, and please tell Erin as well, that, you know, without the daily support every day, you know, and all our irritations and stresses and everything, that everybody was determined to carry this through. I really thank everyone, and I think this is I hope that UQ will continue to function like this even in other areas when it's not stressful, of this sort of collaboration, between UQ International, UQ Advancement. Everybody had a tremendous goodwill and enthusiasm. And then later, there was a kind of, I think it represents a common aspiration. So I want to really acknowledge that, I do know that everything happened because of that value that I give to the common aspiration, and and then we'll and each and every student who has actually come there and worked as equals and got empowered by the knowledge that they gained in the process and became came out of the boundary of being a student, and all of us were learning equally from each other, and it was an amazing experience. We are all, I think it was reward in itself. Now I have spent all my time. So, now what is? Sorry, I hadn't paid attention when you told me about this. I don't know how to work this out. Maybe from here? Enter. Can I just press this one? Okay, thanks. Sorry, when I spoke, this was supposed to have been up. I forgot about that. That was the text that Chipperfield had, when the curatorial team had. Actually, this is the only text that we had at the exhibit. So, I would like to start by saying that it all happened end of February. I got a urgent kind of email saying that I should quickly give my mobile number to David Chipperfield's office because they are seriously considering inviting me to the curatorial section of the Biennale. And they asked me to come up with a proposal. But before that happened, and this was all happening on the phone, I was actually at that time, still I had not yet unpacked it. The semester was going to start. It was a new job. My things were in containers. So it was not a good situation for me to produce any grand idea. So I managed all of this in the evenings at their time zone by phone. I've never done a proposal just by talking about it. But I seem to have managed that way, and I told them that if I didn't have a commitment, I would not be able to produce a work. So most of the proposal was explained in conversations and ideas that I generated based on this. So it was a new way for me to actually approach a project. And my first idea was, when I thought about my response to the theme Common Ground, I tried to I thought that the topic comes up because David Chipperfield talked a lot about the differences between cultures, between building styles and all that. And I thought that the common ground is in fact there. The whole earth is the common physical ground. There's so much in common. The common outnumbers the difference clearly. So I wanted to somehow be able to enhance that. It's already there. It's only in our mind that we think we are different. So how would I be able to show that we are not so different, in fact? It's just apparent that we're different. So that was my approach, and I started trying to think more about trying to visualize the context where I was going to respond with a proposal. And when I looked at all the images of Venice that I knew, I remember feeling the idea of a very old city, everything is built in brick, and brick is actually somehow the key memory of a brick building, where brick is revealed to a great extent through the plaster peeling off. Had it not been a ruin, you would not know a lot about how that structure is. This is the interior space within which I would have to give an exhibit. So I thought, when I had this impression of the space, I started looking at that idea of the whole planet and the fact that that the common is important to establish. I told Chipperfield, and when I looked at the two things, I said that I would like that instead of representing the difference and talking about the difference, I'd like to do something that makes my work looks so much a part of the Venetian thing, or to make the commonality so strongly physically, sensually established in the spot there, that the differences could then reveal themselves in a subtle manner, and then you would in-depth reflect. So I wanted to make that impression, and I had the impression of when I moved from the big city of Bombay and I moved into a rural area, I noticed the plaster peeling in that area, and the heritage bricks that were revealed were different from the ones we used, and it was the same case there. And I thought, you know, you had different layers of bricks of different times. Whenever they fixed the building, you would find different types of bricks, different sizes, different types of lime mortar, and finally you'd have the dark gray cement and modern bricks, all like layers. And I remembered that when I was in India, and I had discovered these rural bricks of Tamil Nadu, which are of a totally different proportion, I realized that I had, 20 years ago, I realized that there's something maybe to revisit, that low-quality bricks are in fact the future, in a sense that they are maybe more sustainable because they are the low quality is not because people do it badly, because the soil is not ideal, the fuel is not ideal, but it's all like if we were to say, let's accept that brick, make thicker walls, maybe that's the future, it's more sustainable. So through those ideas and the fact that people in ancient cultures made bricks in a certain way that makes them actually have a different performance and impact than you look at bricks in today's light, you know, in the green ratings, they always say brick is energy intensive. They're talking about the industrial brick, which burns a lot of coal. It's different if you use other ways of firing your bricks and you're not aiming for that standard. So through that, actually, through trying to prolong the livelihood of people who knew how to do something in a certain way, the outcome was the wall house. And I thought, can we not say that, materially speaking, the brick represents a common ground in architecture, and then use that as an entry point into discussing brick over time, over cultures. It's a material that is the first manufactured material. It has never become redundant. It has survived every social transition. People take it for granted, but there's a lot to be discovered. So I revisited my research of making the wall house. By reviving this, I used the same ancient bricks that were still being made for other purposes, but you never saw them without a plaster because they were always plastered. So I revealed it, I did it as an exposed brick to reveal and make people understand that those bricks have more to give in today's time. Anyway, then this house also represents a lot of hybrid research between knowledge-based systems and, you know, more kind of skills and traditional knowledge that people had, and trying to find the right balance between low-tech and high-tech. And I thought maybe because all that research is so relevant to addressing the fact that all building techniques have become standardized all over the world, and there's a huge urbanization happening in some parts of the world, and we cannot afford environmentally these consequences. So a lot of research I had earlier done had been becoming more and more relevant, and the wall house was being cited again and again as an example. I thought I could use that wall house to take, this is the original setting, and I thought I would revisit. There were many unique things about the way the space program was approached, the climatic issues, but also in the way it actually merged the outside and the inside. And it would be very interesting for me, I thought, if I could relocate this into the inside, and try to make the impression of outside in the inside without using any landscape material, and to take this kind of we are a bit like magicians. We can make, as architects, we can make things appear, we make things disappear, and we can prove that we can make something fit in a context, how we want to, if we can manipulate things. So I thought it would be very interesting to take an absurd notion like something that is appreciated for belonging to a totally different context, put it in an opposite context, and then highlight that people won't see that it's alien. They'll think that it's just an extension of our own landscape. So I thought that the brick city that you experience, you come into the Biennale, you have this excessive brick research displayed, you go back and you'll keep thinking about it when you're in Venice, and you'll think about it in every brick and other detail you see. And you'll see that this innovation is nothing but a layer, and that's another aspect of common ground. It's just a layer on top of, like, innovations don't get made by single people. You know, there are civilizations built on the knowledge of others, and there's a very subtle layering that leads to it. And so I thought I would put the contemporary work right in the traditional thing, both with ancient bricks, and they would just melt all the borders, and they would create some non-confrontational common, merge both plans and merge both spirits of the space as well. So this is how the building was in its original setting. A lot of inside, outside, and a lot of all the materials, like all the finishing materials, many things were experimental. And in many areas, I had incorporated crafts of people to take pride in, instead of calling them unskilled labor all the time, to take pride in their skills and show them that they have these skills and to display those things proudly. And this had gone on to developing many other technologies. One of them was a roofing system made, oh, by the way, we brought some of that. Gee, I forgot to mention. Because it's called one-to-one and everything was about feeling. If you like, you can pass these around. If you want to, if you don't want to dirty your hands, it's fine. But in case, because in the exhibition, many people wanted to touch the materials. The people from Zaha Hadid's office have taken a lot of them because it's so different from the materials they use. So it's gone out, in the world, these kind of ancient materials that we revived. So, and then even the way of building it at that time is the same as working with students, say, as the unskilled part. You're not yet skilled enough to build, but you have some knowledge, and if it is explained to those craftsmen who are called illiterate, etc., but not to treat them as somebody right at the end of the line, but to treat them, involve them in the engineering, everything, full-scale, communication, everybody can contribute as empowered people rather than as just passive people. So those were the ideas. These are images of the original house. Then there was the filler slab that you see, which aims to reduce about 35% or 40% of steel and concrete. So these are all kind of ecologically beneficial strategies. And then there were, many other things, because in my own house, I had tested things that I was doing for larger projects elsewhere, but I didn't want others to take the risk for. So there was a rammed earth wall you see in the back and so on. So the whole idea was to propose this transplanting and arguing with David's team that it's not going to be a part of the house, it has to be the whole house. It's about the architectural experience being an integral experience, questioning the representation of architecture as artifact in exhibitions, looking at it visually, and depriving us from talking about architecture without inhabiting space. All of these ways of exhibiting, I wanted to question that, and we had the idea that we could merge those, interweave those pillars, and somehow make the whole building an extension of the Cordelier, building another building within it. And the students produced amazing, images because that's the only part then the final stage after being accepted, we just submitted these. But even before that, when I was really nervous about building this huge thing, because I was selling the idea to everyone, but I did have some worry myself. I called Ray Meeker, who's a ceramist in India, about whom I wrote the PhD, and you see some of the tubes in his place. I told him this, and I said, do you think this is absurd what I'm doing? He's very critical and very frank and all that. And he told me, of course it's impossible. It's impossible. But you know what? I'm going to buy my tickets, and I'm coming to Venice because I know you're going to make it possible. Again, that's what he said. He had worked on other things with me, and he does also very experimental things himself. And he actually sent me, before I talked to John, he sent me his reservation in a hotel with his wife and his tickets. So I said, okay, this is a clear sign. And then I talked to John about building this whole house and everything. And then the trapeze act began. And then we suddenly had the answer. And we had David telling us that, okay, they told us to be ambitious, and then that's when they told us that we have to actually finance it. Then we were shocked, and I told them, how, you didn't tell us this before, I asked you for constraints. He said, don't think about constraints, just be as ambitious as you like. So anyway, then finally he made an offer of 50,000 euros to us. And because he said, if you're going to do this, I'm going to make it really big and give it central space, but for that I need to know, can we plan everything around you? And then silence from our side for a long, long time. And then 1 month later, we wrote to him because 5 minutes before the deadline, when he was standing at the press conference, I got John's message and I told him, and he replied, look, very poetic. Everybody who was in his office was very shocked by his email. And then I went quickly to India and I started the production of prototypes, and we revisited all the work we had done. And Ray Mika had actually taken up the role of designing, monitoring the quality. And these are all the people. The other dimension was to celebrate all the hands at work that people don't even realize, the people who actually contribute. So this shows how these are fired by very benign biological waste, and there are lots and lots of societies and communities who just help building. So then this material had to be packaged to Venice. And in India, building material, there's no packaging available. They bring it to the site without packaging. So we couldn't find cartons and anything. It was a real, like at every stage there was difficulty. I brought the samples back here, and already they didn't survive the travel in my suitcase, so we got really worried. But then we introduced primitive methods at UQ, and we had Michael and even Greg measuring things, water, bucket, checking if the scale was right. Greg wanted to check if that old-fashioned scale we found was right. So we did very systematic sort of things. And then after all the studies began, here we had to transport. We had to actually do custom clearance of material. We had 3 containers to represent the authenticity. If I had taken Venetian materials, of course it would belong. I wanted to show that an alien thing can also belong. So I had to take each and every rock and all that from India, justify that our bricks were not mud, because we are not allowed to get mud, which we also took. But our bricks looked like mud already, so that was the thing. And then we had to transport people from India who had never visited anywhere else. They didn't have passports, forget about visas. We didn't know how to show these people are experts. Nobody was believing us. Anyway, we got them, and I found them. I only realized later that when I saw this picture, when I was looking these days, that they are all without shoes roaming around, because they complained that Michael made the heavy shoes Michael gave them to wear was giving them muscle pain. Not the work they did, just the fact that they had to wear shoes. They were shocked that they had to wear shoes. So they used to go around rest of the time in Venice barefoot. And and then the last point I want to make is that I wanted to take the ground aspect as a very serious thing, to render the ground in the common ground. And I said I didn't mind if the whole building wasn't completed, but the whole ground should be treated well to make it. What we did is we discovered the brick rubble from the original Cordelier. We used that as pebbles in the landscape, and many things were improvised on the spot, that we used the remaining materials to create the landscape in great detail, so that it really merged finally like this, and that's the exhibit. So when you came in, it was very interesting. People actually were mistaking some of the Cordelier pillars for ours and the other brickwork, and it was a lot of that sort of a feeling. There was a brick vault, a glass wine bottle vault in the front. It was left unfinished to the same extent that the architecture of the ruin, which was unfinished, revealing construction. There was this architecture in the making, unfinished, revealing construction, and the two were merging. So both look like ruin or in construction. So that thing was also melting. You could go upstairs, and some parts were shown unfinished. We also showed how the exhibition itself stood. We managed to create the pond and everything. So, we had other collaborators like Ray Mika's film being shown there, the ceramic artist, other people who researched on brick, Harun Farouki, his film on comparing brick, and we had Andreas Defner's photographic archiving of the original house and the one now, also displayed, and a time lapse of the whole construction in one section. So this was the final impact of the thing, and it looked so peaceful, but in order to find out more, you'll see how the other pictures looked. This is the idea and the final part. And now we'll have Greg continuing and talking about the engineering aspect, challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anu. So, lots of speakers. I'll be fairly brief. I'll just talk a little bit about my involvement and the initial design work, and then I'll join in some of the discussion later when we talk about construction. So, I became involved because for a number of years I've taught at the University of Queensland. I teach structural technology to architects and I teach design to civil engineers. And over that period I've made several observations about the different ways that developing engineers and developing architects think, which I think Anu's probably already alluded to. So one afternoon, after telling a whole pack of architects, or retelling a whole pack of architects how Gaudi's work works structurally, in terms of structural technology, Tim O'Rourke said, "You must meet Anupama Kundoo and find out all about UQ's entry into the Venice Biennale." And I was so excited after getting all revved up about Gaudi's work that I just couldn't say no. And after seeing the wall house, I was just totally taken by it. The original idea was that we'd replicate that house inside the exhibition space at the Arsenale in Venice. But immediately became obvious that there were certain bits that we couldn't do. We couldn't build concrete columns. We couldn't build big, stiff concrete gutters. And so the first thing that we had to rethink was how do we support the vault? And from that came a steel structure. So the steel was procured, obviously locally, and assembled, pre-designed, prefabricated, etc. And that made sense. And then, some weeks later, we sent an initial brief to Venice and we had the information come back that the floor load that this space could accept was only 4 kilopascals. So that's 400 kilograms per square metre, which sounds like a lot of load. It's quite low for an exhibition space, and it's very, very low if you're thinking of building a 5 metre tall double brick wall. Okay. So that changed the whole structural tectonic. What that really meant was that we now had to find some way of distributing this load out, and of course we fired an email back to the Italian engineers and said, okay, so if there's a problem with the floor, and the problem was the floor would crack and they'd have to replace this stone, if there's a real problem with the floor, what we need to know straight away is how stiff is the floor and how stiff is the foundation. We can analyse all the loads from the loading pattern and we can work out exactly whether this stone is going to crack or not. And what we got back from Italy was total radio silence. So I don't know whether all that request was just lost in the technical translation. But in any case, we then looked at this system, this spreader system. Is it? Okay. Hey, this is us. Okay. I should have then, I've left out the point where, of course, I saw this as an opportunity to get students involved from civil engineering to actually build stuff. Because the initial reaction from probably myself and I guess other engineers to this proposal was, well, okay, so we're building this structure out of materials which we don't know much about. So the first thing we must do is we must test all these materials and we must test all of the joints and we must do lots of analysis and make sure that this thing actually works. And the response was, no, actually, we're just going to build this thing. This thing is an experiment, it is an experimental structure, and part of the experience is actually just recreating this thing at 1-to-1. So a great experience for the engineering students as well as the architecture students. Lots to be learnt from building at 1-to-1. So effectively now we're at the stage where we're building a slightly different structure. And so we had the spreader system here that spread the loads out and basically satisfied the Italian engineers that there was some method of distributing the load out. And because then we knew that they knew nothing about the stiffness of the soil and the modulus of the pavement, etc., we knew that that was going to fly. Okay, so that worked, and it was enough to convince the authorities that it was going to work. And we were concerned about, can you build a brick structure, a rigid brick structure, on top of this timber that we get from somewhere in Germany, Michael? Okay, with possibly a varied moisture content. So there was concern, but we have this stiff and rigid structure which distributes the load. Then we had this problem that there is just too much load. So how do we reduce the load? And the option that we came up with was brick veneer, which is really interesting because brick veneer, as it turns out, is a really Aussie thing. And I'm saying this in front of a whole room of architects, but I believe that brick veneer was actually invented in Australia and that we've actually used it here for about 160 years. Robert Riddell is not quite nodding yet, but he's not shaking his head the wrong way either. Okay. So this is interesting. So here comes the common ground from Australia, some of the Australian construction technique. And this kind of brings a whole heap of ideas to the team as well. Can we actually slice these bricks in half to make them thinner? In actual fact, well, why does brick veneer use 110 millimetre thick bricks anyway? Is it just because we started with bricks that were that big and the rich people got to build solid brick walls, and then someone who couldn't afford solid brick walls decided, let's have a go at this brick veneer thing? And so brick veneer became the construction method of the common people. So that's still unanswered. I still don't know why we don't use thinner brick. And if we can use thinner brick, then actually we can exploit the cavity and perhaps an already sustainable construction technique can become more sustainable. So the other thing that came out of the strength of the material, I suppose, was just that because these bricks are wonderful in the fact that they're locally made, can we not just find out how cheaply we can make materials and then work out how we can employ them in structures, rather than saying, okay, well, this is a bad material because it doesn't meet X standard. And that's interesting from an Australian point of view as well, because in Australia, clay on sites is a big problem for brick buildings. And we build over the top of the clay, and if we have lots of clay, we have deep foundations. But in fact, could we be using the clay on site somehow to actually make these bricks in a more local and sustainable way? One of these people has okay English and the other of these has only Italian, yet somehow we managed to make some last minute rectifications to the steel structure. When I'd arrived on site, the first vault had actually already collapsed, which was devastating for the project team. And Michael will show the sequence of that later. But so this is a picture of the second vault being put into place. It's really interesting the way that this vault goes together, and it's something that can't be predicted just from drawings. The tubes are nested, as you can see from the tubes that are passed around, and they're kind of massaged into position by rotating 2 or 3 tubes in line to get this kind of neat fit. And have we got? I don't think we've got the slide of the prototype in Oroville, but that has a very light scaffold. This is a stiff support, and that was part of the reason that the first vault had failed. But I'll leave that to Michael to cover, and I can come in there later. So, yep, I think that's it for me, Michael. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so the School of Architecture at UQ has been doing some prototyping over the past few years, but this, I guess, sort of was a little bit out of the box. You know, we were, I guess, trying to do the biggest, perhaps the most sophisticated. We were the furthest away, and we were bringing people from different places who didn't know each other in a very short space of time. But in some ways, the way that we do this sort of design build, and I guess a lot of the self-build type of way people work, is something that we looked at it again, and we also sort of got inspiration again from a lot of the stuff that Anu was exploring in her first house. So, you know, achieving sophistication through simple means, being able to sort of, I guess, bring people through baby steps and to sort of scale these things up. And then all of a sudden, through sort of lower technology materials, utilised in a sort of a smart, strategic way, and people can achieve amazing things. But one of the things that you do have to be conscious of is that the tolerance between those systems needs to be rather fluid, and tolerance in this case worked on many different levels. And the other thing, I guess, was this perpetual triage that was going on during the process. And, you know, the sort of joke of the sort of David Chipperfield's sidekick on site, Jaffa Cole, was constantly at me, you know, are we on schedule, are we on schedule, are we on schedule? And we kept sort of saying, well, which schedule? And so we kept having to just sort of trim the sails as we went along. So we couldn't necessarily be precious about things as well. But at the end of the day, I think the approach where we were looking at, I guess, revealing the technology in the space through the lens of like a built ruin gave us a little bit of latitude in how to finally deploy that. So a lot of the work that we could do at the start was, I guess, just upskilling the relationship between ourselves. Anu, Greg, myself hadn't worked together before. We had the students, a group of students, small group of 5 at the start, gearing up, and they would be our lieutenants when we got there first. But we also needed to sort of understand the problem. So we did a lot of playing with stuff. We spoke a lot. Getting the materials from India when Anu did her trip across was brilliant, because it really gave a tangibility to the process that was a bit absent before then. And then, you know, the sort of sleepless nights and so on followed. We then built this sort of large model that is sitting out in the foyer. And although it is a little bit of a, I guess, an indulgence, what it did do is that we could then go step by step with the students and start to sort of upskill and just get the sense of what this thing is that we're dealing with. And when we wheeled it out into the foyer, it seemed to transform people's thinking about it as well. And it was sort of like our first achievement, I guess. And we used it for a lot of the publicity, and so we used that as a push as well in order to get the support, additional support that we needed to bring the project into reality. So there was concern that the materials were not robust, they weren't, you know, we didn't know how they were going to work, so we pretty much ignored it. And then we started working on other things. So one of the I guess, strategies of the self-supporting arch, we tried to say, well, what other materials can we use for that? Anu had the ambition of doing it in glass, which we did manage in the end, and also paper cups. So we used the stacking, we used the same, I guess, catenary set out, and making our own jigs. As you can see, the sort of the floppiness of the cups, that we didn't quite get it right the first time, but power to it. And I must say that the students were brilliant, and sorry to sort of lump them into the word students, it's sort of amalgamous sort of morass, but you know, each one was brilliant in their own way. And so we were here, you know, cutting up old bottles. It looks like we've a bunch of alcoholics that didn't have much better to do. How are we going to cut these when we're over there? And then we had Greg nagging us that there wasn't enough bracing and blah-de-blah-de-blah. But this was sort of one of the first, I guess, neatened up versions of a sketch Greg gave us. And it was really at this point where we were laying out the spread and just thinking, far out, you know, how are we actually going to set these things out? Everything was sort of individualised and so on. So very quickly, we sort of modularised almost everything in the structure so that we could make things in parallel we can sort of prefabricate on site, and though we were prefabricating on site, we also had an immense amount of adaptability. So we did a lot of these sort of very technical drawings, and part of this was done to appease Enzo, the sort of local engineer, and David, that we were serious. But again, it's not really how it turned out, but that's okay. The other sort of impost, how many bricks is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? How can we stack these bricks? How many containers do we need? How are we going to stack them? And the weights, blah, blah, blah. And it's these sorts of things that you don't necessarily deal with on a day-to-day. So here we are, we're moving into the site, and, Venice, beautiful one day, perfect the next. But the more, it gets under your skin in both in a positive and a slightly irritating way as well. But they were kind of ready for us, so they were all over the top of us, so we had nothing to worry about. So logging, what seemed to be 2 tonnes of our first fixings to the site, trying to read the map, trying to get down tight alleyways. So, the blokes in the ute, that's the hand truck is the way. If the hand truck's not good enough, then we bring in the boat. If that boat's not big enough, we bring in a bigger boat. And if that's not big enough, we just get the biggest one and bring all the trucks and everything with us as well. So it's novel, it's expansive, and it's a real nightmare to just sort of get all the ducks lining up. So Venice is not the sort of place where you want a precision, well-oiled machine. You do need a lot of thick skin and improvisation. Our local hardware store, which almost everyone got lost the first 10 times we directed them to find it, but the guy in there was absolutely brilliant, and we became great mates after that, even though we couldn't understand each other. So here we've got the other 2 main people whose, without their help, all of our collective sanities would be gone. Alvise, who was our local architect, standing in the middle, and Shaker, who I guess was he the team leader of the group? Would you say, like the foreman or Shaker? Yeah, but he was brilliant as well, and very much a team player. But here we are, scratching our heads. Places are going to shut down, and they tell you, well, Venice shuts down in the middle of August. You don't believe it until it actually happens. And although this looks benign, this was just brutal. It was just hot every day. We got scrutinised like you wouldn't believe. No one else got our sort of occupational health and safety manager scrutinised every application. Mr. Boskala, who came around without safety glasses and his sandals, telling us how to suck eggs. And there we have the starting point. Now, I'm just going to really quickly just go through, just to give a sense of how this is building up over time. And I guess the modularity of this was crucial. So the drawings were reconstructed in a way that we can distribute them. Students could then sort of take ownership of that. They were modularised, they could produce, teams could produce, and everyone was always sort of kept busy and very productive. And the sort of core team who was there at the start were just brilliant lieutenants, and then they started schooling up the Italians and the other Australian students who came in throughout the process. The materials from India were a little bit late at the start, so we did have to co-opt these guys to help us with the timber structure, which they took enthusiastically up until about the 4th day, in which they were mildly sick of it. The building didn't fit, so we were scratching our heads how to make it fit. And then the brilliant thing, once we sort of got to a point where a lot of these elements were made, they went together very quickly. There's how you deal with the sort of safe loading limits, and the Venetians just dump tons and tons and tons of stuff and don't seem to care. Anyway, timber structure going together, and you get to this point and think, far out, that's got to turn into a building in less than 5 weeks. We did get a bit of help with the use of the local Italian bricks, but they got the hang of that pretty quickly. Just going back there, the gentleman in the black on the extreme right, Massimiliano Bigarello, is our hero. Without him, we would not be able to complete the project. He was the Biennale's fixer, and he did a lot of fixing for us. The first part where we started with the small house, the Indian team did take a while to sort of get into the swing of things, relearning trying to find the standard and also working with the timber. And as you can see, we did modify our approach. We did pillage a lot of waste material to sort of make this, I guess, shuttering for the brickwork to form, but it kind of formed this sort of layers of skin, which was also kind of a curious analogy about how we were coming together. And at some point, we were in song, using some unusual stuff for us, so fabricating steel with cranes. Okay, we weren't driving the crane, and this is where the tech support from civil engineering was absolutely vital and well appreciated. Jason van der Gevel is a hero in this instance, and somehow we managed to get all of this up. Experimentation with fibre cement, with ferrous cement on site. And then I like this image because it sort of also shows a visceral or very tactile one-to-one. And eventually we're getting everyone involved. So, you know, the Indians had a lot more crafting skill than we did. You know, we were just sort of banging up timber frames. But they brought us along and we all learnt immense amounts from it, rammed earth. And it's just sort of starting to come together. Anu improvising with some waste material from upstairs and comes up with this brilliant surface finish. And at the end, again, improvisation using some ceiling hangers. Students were absolutely brilliant. Once we started, the confidence grew. This glass vault, which seemed like a nutty idea, and here's the second proof of concept where Katie took a leading role. It was there sitting and it didn't collapse, it creaked a lot, but power to them, they persisted and they got it up and it looked fantastic. The clay pipes, it looks kind of neat and beguiling, but can you imagine carrying all of those up 4.5 metres? And so cricket skills come on board there. Common ground, cricket. And here we go, we thought we were travelling, it was looking brilliant. Unloading the vault and kabam, we had the first collapse. And it could have been devastating because we were behind schedule, but this was one schedule thing that we really couldn't be behind. We couldn't not have a vault. And power to everyone. This is very shortly after the vault had collapsed. And you can see there, no one's hair's on fire and everyone's fairly calm in that corner. And we did sort of get through it. There was a lot of soul searching about it. And it's still, the jury's, I think, still a little bit out. I think we're fairly clear about what caused it and how to prevent it. And I think what these guys took on board, and it was great that Greg was there at the right time at the end to reconstruct this, because they learnt a lot about sort of how the structure worked, and then they responded to that in the way that they made it. So these guys are very skilled. They're using sort of their hands, and the acoustics of the pot is also fundamental. I warned Greg about standing up there without the handrail, but he didn't listen. Making the stair one day before the exhibition, and one of our other heroes, volunteer Zegler Fergus, can give you other stories about that if you buttonhole him outside. And here's 24 hours out. So I'd like to invite Katie up, because I'd like to get some student perspective. So Katie, do you want to just quickly...
Okay, hi. I guess I should first acknowledge that I'm one of a very big group of students who worked on this project. But I'd like to bring particular attention to Yohei, Jesse and Sari, who worked alongside with me from the start. And I guess by sharing some of my insights from working on this project, I'd like to shed some light on what it was like to be a student working in Brisbane and in Venice on the Wall House. Okay, so the process for us began when we were asked by Anu to kind of, I guess, visually translate her sketch into something that could be sent to David Chipperfield's curatorial team. The three of us, Yohei, Jessie, and I, didn't realize, what was really happening. We didn't know that, if we would be going to Venice. So we sort of said yes and jumped into it. The first exercise was, I guess, just a quick and simple Photoshop job. We got the original wall house and transcribed it into the coterie. And I think this sort of quick and simple exercise is really useful for us to understand Anu's intentions. I think, doing something quick as a student helps you understand atmosphere, scale, so on and so forth. Okay, following on from that, we worked on a 1:20 plywood model. I think it was a very useful tool in terms of selling the project, but from a student perspective, it took a really long time to build. And I think when you're trying to test ideas, quick is good. So that's what I learned from that. Okay. Anu was very adamant that we should take sort of ownership of prototyping a vault out of recycled materials. I don't think it would surprise you if I said that, we're computer savvy, we know how to use the CNC, but when it comes to prototyping something, we're all a bit scared as students. So we're very hesitant, and I don't think we didn't jump into it as much as maybe Anu had hoped, but it was something that was going to continue on into Venice, so I'll talk about it a bit later. Okay, so jumping forward to Venice. Oh, Mara's calling. Sorry. So the reality of design build really hit home when we were faced with this sea of spreader frames that we'd just constructed. We realized that in about 7 weeks, we would have to have a whole building. And I guess I'd like to comment that the fact that design build is a learning process, wasn't new to us, but the university had never attempted something at this scale ever before, and so I guess it was sort of a very new process for everyone involved, and we were all, I think, a little bit scared. That's Michael. Yeah, so it was really hard, and just simply putting together frames really gave me an insight into and an appreciation, I guess, for the effort that goes into materializing ideas in architecture. And I think as a student, that's a lesson that I will never forget. I'd like to add that through hard work, I think there's a real sense of camaraderie and friendship and respect that's born. And so Yohei, Jessie, and I were working alongside Bree, who is quite a bossy but very capable engineer. And I think when you work with people with very different perspectives, you realize that you have something to bring, but also when you're making a building, you need that input from someone else. So that was very important. Next point. We were also joined / chaperoned by a whole team of craftsmen from Tamil Nadu. And I think what was important about us working with them was that they kind of proved that an intuitive approach to site and building often, more than not, produces vastly simpler and more efficient solutions. So, if I'm ever on site, I'm going to be the first one to ask the builder, how should I do this? Okay, so revisiting the prototyping. I guess Anu and Michael wanted us to follow through with this because when you actually have to think about, even if it's a simple task, you know, how it will happen, and through that you gain a sense of ownership. So all of us were outside of our comfort zone, but we persevered and we assembled this wine bottle vault which didn't collapse, and that gave us the ticket to assemble it and have it as part of the final exhibit, which is rather exciting, I think. And sorry, at this point of the build, as you can see, it's kind of the end, well, 2 weeks, I think. We had a lot of students from Brisbane come to help, and without their hard work, we wouldn't have been able to finish the build, so just wanted to mention them. I'm going to end on this slide because it took me a long time to get over the nightmares. And even when I was walking through the final exhibit, I couldn't see it for what it was. And so when I got back to Brisbane, I was just Googling and I found this, I think this website to do with hobby crafts, and they sort of took this photo of our glass bottle vault. And I wanted to put it here because someone else's photo made me realize that our glass bottle vault, you know, could produce skeletal-like reflections on a ceiling or a surface. And that's something that, you know, we didn't premeditate or try to create. And I think that's the value in trusting in a process that you might not necessarily have control over, because the end result is often surprising and very rewarding. Thank you.
I'll be quick. I was part of the team of 5 people consisting of Michael and 3 other students and I, Anders, Scott and Tom, see there supervising Michael, whose job was to empty the exhibition space of the house, landscaping and tools in 3 weeks. So some people would ask, what is the purpose of involving students in the deconstruction phase when contractors could have done the job more efficiently and at a similar cost? My answer is that as an architecture student in my final year of studies, the deconstruction experience surprisingly infused in me a suite of knowledge that I did not even know I lacked. I went to most of the lectures, so. Some of the knowledge I gained included using tools effectively, planning a deconstruction sequence, working safely with the team on site, understanding materials through touching and then breaking, and reflecting on the project. We had time to socialise with Italian students, Italian professionals, and the Radical Re-Biennale crew. The crew was sitting here. Normally they don't wear hard hats, but they did for the photo. Yeah. Of course, I also seized the opportunities which came with living in Venice for a month. My highlight was splashing around in the Acqua Alta in St. Marco Square. So that happened 3 times in the first week, so that was very fun. Next. On site, I made friends and foes with building materials. A brick is solid, and it hurts when you drop it on your fingers. My knowledge of materials extended from a 3D understanding to a 4D, sometimes painful form of education. The act of prying each individual brick from the pavement was an intimate lesson that showed me how an ordinary block of material can be designed to create holistic designs, innovations. So what were once gridded lines on drawings stopped looking like lines and started to look like actual bricks. Upon our return to Brisbane, I reflected on the deconstruction experience. My strongest memories happened to be of my strongest struggles at the time. I remembered my fatigued right arm pumping the hammer up and down against the mountains of bricks as we broke them into small enough pieces for disposal. I thought about the moments where we had to change the drill bits 5 times in the same wall because there were lots of different types of screws in one wall. So what seemed like annoyances at the time were actually a very strong way of hammering into my head what can be improved in the next construction. So, overall, I have decided that the deconstruction phase is not an end in itself. It is part of the cyclical process of learning how to design and build architecture. To have experienced the process of deconstruction and have the chance to reflect on what was done well and what could have been improved, allowed the project to be unlocked again so that some design ideas could be refined for the next project. Overall, I think we build knowledge when we build, but I think we also build knowledge when we unbuild. That's all I have to say.
Just one other 2 minutes, because this is the catharsis. Because we actually did pull down the vault, and the next one, and the next one, step by step. We pulled all the poles out, and voila, it stood up by itself. And then the next one, and fell down by itself, because someone had accidentally pushed a scaffold into it, and surprisingly it still stood until about an hour and a half later when it sort of fell on its own volition. Just a couple of things I'd just like to add, other than the fact that the students were absolutely brilliant, and I keep talking about them in the whole. There were other people who were involved. These two people, we're not alcoholics. This was the only time we had a drink together, which is at the end. Massimiliano Bigarello and Alviso Marzolo, who really did help us out on site and help navigate things. This is a very nice image because it shows, I guess, the diversity. Okay, it was a little bit of a strategy that we all have different coloured t-shirts and so on, but it was brilliant. But the other very important thing is that we did have some volunteers, and I just really like to quickly thank them. William Chan, Zegler Fergus, who was absolutely brilliant throughout, Troy Brooks and Jason Vandergevel, who were from the School of Civil Engineering, were our aces in the hole. Sam Boasted, Dan Loud, Georgina Russell and Amy Learmonth also came on their own volition and did brilliant work. Leah Gallagher, Midge Dickson, Nicola Eason and Elliot Harvey were also students who came over from UQ, other than the core team, and without them we wouldn't have got the project done. I don't know, Anna, did you want to make any more? Thank you. Okay, so... Okay. So we'll just finish on the Chipperfield's note about the presentation. Do you want me to read it or?
No. I think we should let
Okay,
John...
so we'll close it off. You can read that in your own time, and maybe John, do you want to close it off? Thank you.
Look, we've had a fantastic presentation, and not surprisingly, with 5 people speaking, we've run out of time for discussion. So we have to close the session now. But let's thank again our speakers. Now, this is the first of our series for this year. So Professor Lewis Fiducci has curated a series of speakers who will be on in the subsequent weeks. And next week we'll have a graduate of the school, Peter Besley from the London firm Assemblage, who'll be showing, amongst other things, he and his partners' winning design for the competition for the Iraqi Parliament. So this post is about to come out. Those of you who'd like further information about the talk series can do that from the State Library's website or from the school's website, where you can subscribe to a news list. Looking forward to seeing you again next week and throughout the series. Thanks, everybody.